Welcome back to the channel. This will be my team selection for Gameweek 13. I've got 2 chips available for the first half of the season, the wildcard and the free hit. I'll be comparing both of them with updated drafts following the Wednesday Champions League matches and also assessing my transfer plans without any chips and seeing if I could use 2 free transfers at my disposal to really bolster my 50-man squad. You can also see my FPL challenge team with Emi Martinez in goal, and this week it is called Out of Possession, so you get +1 point for every ball recovery. So I've got Keane, Lacroix, Caicedo, Haaland captain, and Igor Thiago, but it might be worth captaining a ball recovery merchant, so to speak, and I think one of those 2 defenders or Caicedo in the midfield could be brilliant when it comes to DEFCON, and you can get a massive return in FPL Challenge this week. I only got 32 last time out, but even a few picks like Van Dijk did the business with the pass completion rate as it was last week with in possession, and I'll be covering FPL Challenge in all my deadline streams and team selection podcasts throughout the season. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy, and check all the links in the description. That includes my Discord server and FPL League. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. You know the drill by now. I'll start off with a review of the previous match day, which was Game Week 12, and it was slightly disappointing compared to the other game weeks prior to that. But Robert Sanchez in goal kept a clean sheet in another victory for Chelsea. They won 2-0 away to Burnley, and they now sit second in the Premier League table, 6 points behind Arsenal, the upcoming opponent. So that could be a title decider almost. If Arsenal can pull away there, then they will have a bit of breathing room at the top of the Premier League table. But Chelsea can make it a very interesting London sort of rivalry for the title this season, and a win there for the Blues would put them in a great position competing with Man City and Arsenal for that league. But they also got a 3-0 win over Barcelona in midweek. Very impressive stuff. The Catalans did go down to 10 men, but Chelsea were already 1-0 up before the red card to Ronald Araujo, and Robert Sanchez has been keeping plenty of clean sheets across all competitions, and I think he's a very solid goalkeeper even on the wild card, costing 4.8 million. In my defensive line, well, I had 1 substitution take place with Ranilo Mandava replacing the injured Antoine Semenyo, and he got a point courtesy of a booking and also conceding in the last 10 minutes of that game. Virgil van Dijk considered 3 times against Nottingham Forest, and Liverpool have been absolutely atrocious with 9 losses out of the last 12 across all competitions. We could see a managerial change very soon. They lost 4-1 at home against PSV Eindhoven on Wednesday night, and Van Dijk conceded a penalty, got a booking, and -1 points in UCL Fantasy. It would have been -2 if the ball recovery system wasn't in place in that game. And Lacroix was the standout player in my entire 50-man squad with 11 points. But unfortunately, the defensive contributions were altered on Saturday night when I was doing the reaction stream. So he was on course for 10 defensive contributions, but they updated the stats and it went down to 8. And that means no DEFCON points. So instead of 13, he got 11. And that was the difference between a green and a red arrow in my situation. And Jurrien Timber provided an assist in a 4-1 win against Tottenham Hotspur. And a couple of days later, he scored in another 3-1 victory against Bayern Munich. So Jurrien Timber is in sensational form right now. And last season, he was very solid defensively, but he was lacking a little bit going forwards. But that isn't the case this time round. But some of my midfielders could learn a thing or 2 from Jurrien Timber, because they were absolutely awful in Ndai and Bruno Fernandes, who both blanked in that 1-0 win for Everton on Monday night. And Ismaila Sarr has been very disappointing in the Premier League. He might be getting a few goals in the Carabao Cup, like the brace he scored against Liverpool. He also got some goal contributions in the Europa Conference League recently, but none at all in the Premier League when it counts. And the likes of Minta, Declan Rice, Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez are all offering better value. Even Bruno Guimaraes, who I highlighted in my best wildcard squad video and the transfer tips. As for my 3 forwards, Erling Haaland blanked yet again, and across the last 3 matches in FPL and UCL Fantasy, only 1 return, and he still missed a penalty against Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, so he only got 4 points on that occasion. Joao Pedro was booked, and Voltemada missed some big chances against Man City in a 2-1 victory there. And Man City, by the way, rotated very heavily in midweek against Bayer Leverkusen, and they lost 2-0. So it's kind of a tale of different teams here in the Premier League. Newcastle also lost in the Champions League against Marseille, and Voltemada wasn't a starter. Instead, it was Anthony Gordon playing up front with Harvey Barnes, who scored yet again, and that's 3 consecutive games now against Brentford, Man City and Marseille, where he has scored. But I still think Voltemada is a solid option on the wildcard or using free transfers, particularly in game weeks like 14 and 15, but I do prefer Igor Thiago, Mateta and Erling Haaland. As for my bench, you can see it was very poor once again. Dubravka got 2 points, Semenyo missed out, and that's why Ronaldo Mandava was subbed on for him. And by the way, a couple of weeks ago, I sold Konsa for Dan Burn. If I had started Konsa in the week where I sold him against Man City, that would have been 8 points. And in a week like this, it would have been very handy to have him come on, because I think Konsa has been more consistent compared to Ronaldo Mandava and most of my defenders. I know he conceded against Leeds United, but if you compare him with Dan Burn in FPL, there is no competition. Dan Burn has been horrific since I signed him. He was suspended against Man City, but he's now available, and he started against Marseille in the Champions League at left back, but I would have some concerns about his starting berth in the weeks to come. And Reinders came off the bench against Newcastle to deliver 1 point yet again. He has been awful since Game Week 1, where he did the business against Wolves. So as you can see, it was a small red arrow to 565,000. So it's a very small one. We're talking about 20 to 30,000 places at most. I got 41 points, and it was very disappointing in general. But at the end of the day, Lacroix did kind of ease the pain a little bit. And I also was close to buying Daniel Munoz instead of Van Dijk. That would have been the game changer and turned a relatively underwhelming week into a great one. And sometimes in FPL, it comes down to fine margins. I also wanted to keep a spot open for Jean-Philippe Mateta, but since I'm planning to wildcard and free hit fairly soon, then maybe I could have gone for that Daniel Munoz punt against Wolves. He is 1 yellow card away from suspension. The same goes for multiple players. Ronaldo Mandava is another one. He's been getting a lot of bookings in the last couple of games against Arsenal and Fulham. So there are a lot of things to look out for over the Christmas period until we reach Game Week 20, where then we get into the second half of the campaign, and the wildcard, free hit, bench boost and triple captain will all reset. Make sure to use those chips before Game Week 20, and Game Week 13 marks a great opportunity to use the triple captaincy on Erling Haaland facing Leeds after that rest against Bayer Leverkusen. The wildcard and free hit could also be well used in such a game week, and I would lean towards the free hit at this moment in time. But you'll see my final team, of course, in the deadline stream, and in this video you will see my very definitive and laid out transfer plans, not just for this upcoming deadline, but also in the weeks to come. Next up, though, is going to be the prices, and then I'll talk about some transfers in every single position. Robert Sanchez costs 4.8 million, and despite Chelsea having some poor fixtures on paper, I'd rather invest in Robert Sanchez over Verbruggen, Petrovic and Kelleher. There is some nice rotation between Brighton and Brentford, admittedly, but you can always cover that sort of defensive rotation with your defenders. So maybe going for Van den Berg and a Brighton option like Van Heck, for example, that could work very well, and they're quite solid when it comes to DEFCON. Jurrien Timber went up in price a few days ago to 6.3 million. He is probably the best defender in the game, alongside Daniel Munoz, in the absence of Gabriel Magalhaes for the next month or so. And Lacroix is 5 million. He was at 5.1 over a month ago, but he did go back down fairly recently. And Van Dijk went up only a week ago, but if Liverpool continue like this, we could see a price drop for the Dutch centre-back. And Ronaldo Mandava is still 4 million, and ultimately, whenever he has returned, he has been on my bench. He has been a bit frustrating, but he's a 4 million defender, and he will blank in most matches. As for Ndai, he's 6.6. He has been a bit underwhelming in the last couple of matches, with consecutive blanks against Fulham and Man United. And Ismaila Sarr is getting the price rises. He is at 6.7 million, but not the FPL returns, which is even more important. And Bruno Fernandes played fairly well against Everton, but he isn't really getting enough goals from open play, and he costs 8.9 million as a result. Joao Pedro is 7.5, but I could see him dropping fairly soon, and moving him on to Mateta and Igor Thiago is a top recommendation from me, and I've been talking about this for the past month or two, and that is my favourite front three alongside Erling Haaland. But Nick Voltemada isn't too far off, and he costs 7.4 million, but his finishing against Man City left a lot to be desired. And on my bench, Dubravka is also 4 million. Semenyo is at 7.9 million now, so we've seen 2 price drops over the last week. And Reinders is 5.4. He has been so disappointing, but after that promising start, there was only 1 return afterwards against Arsenal when he was on my bench. And Dan Burn is 5.1 million, but he's no longer red flagged because he's available and he is back from that suspension. So let's talk about some transfer plans, starting with the goalkeeper, and this will be looking at the free hit specifically. So I think Emi Martinez could be the very best option between the sticks for Gameweek 13, and even longer term, he might be the best way of covering Aston Villa defensively over Matty Cash, Luca Dean, and Konsa. I just don't think these Villa defenders offer enough defcon and attacking potential, but if I had to pick one, it would be Matty Cash. I just like Emi Martinez though against Wolves at home, but I also wouldn't absolutely bank on a clean sheet for the Villains. They are second in the clean sheet odds behind Man City, and I did show these in my recent podcast, like the best free hit squad and the top 10 captains as well in the Wildcard video, so all of that is covered in those respective videos. But Robert Sanchez is a good option in the long term, and if I was wildcarding, I'd still lean towards him over Emi Martinez. As for my highlight defender transfer, Dan Burn out to Nico Riley is also on the cards, and I think a Man City defender is worthwhile against Leeds. After that massive rotation against Leverkusen, it backfired, and Pep Guardiola recognises that, and I think they're going to go all out against Leeds this weekend and get a massive result and possibly a clean sheet on top of it. Nico Riley has more attacking threat than Gvardiol, who is playing as a centre-back nowadays, but you're not going to get much when it comes to defcon, so be very mindful about that, because this season, centre-backs and holding midfielders are becoming much more prominent, and I don't think full-backs are as important as they were in the years gone by. As for the midfield, Antoine Semenyo could be sold to Mohamed Salah, but I know he played fairly well against Nottingham Forest, and he wasn't the main reason why Liverpool lost 3-0, but we're not seeing the best of the Egyptian. The chemistry isn't there in the attack, and Arne Slot isn't finding solutions to their many defensive woes, and even offensively, they're struggling to score in certain games, and that's now back-to-back 3-0 losses against Man City and Nottingham Forest, and even against PSV Eindhoven after a decent start. They only scored one goal in a home match, but admittedly, PSV are in great form. And up front, João Pedro to Igor Thiago makes so much sense. You're getting better fixtures like Burnley at home this week, although Brentford do face Arsenal away in Gameweek 14, and you also get a much better value at 6.5 million, and Igor Thiago will rise again before the Gameweek 13 deadline, in my opinion, and I think he's also going to score more goals. He's got 9 for the season, only second behind Erling Haaland in the Golden Boot race, and the same goes for points scored amongst forwards in Fantasy Premier League. But don't get it twisted, I still think Jean-Philippe Mateta is a great long-term purchase, and Danny Welbeck should be considered at 6.6 million, but when you look at the underlying numbers, Igor Thiago and Mateta stand out above the rest, and Thiago has 15 big chances, an XG figure of over 7, and a healthy number of shots. He's on penalties, and clearly the talismanic figure for Brentford this season, and it's a great time to buy him against Burnley at home. Let me show you my Gameweek 13 team selection without making any transfers and compare this to my wildcard and free hit squads and talk about why I'm leaning towards the free hit. So Dubravka is in goal facing Brentford away. I would prefer that over Robert Sanchez against Arsenal, and the Blues have been very impressive recently with 8 wins out of the last 10 matches, but their record against Arsenal has been poor for several years now, and they haven't beaten the Gunners at Stamford Bridge since 2018, but they would still fancy themselves after a very impressive win against Barcelona. But Arsenal are also in fine form with 9 victories out of the last 10, and they just beat Bayern Munich 3-1 and the North London derby very convincingly. Let's go into my defensive line as well with Lacroix, Timber and Virgil van Dijk, which looks good on paper, but Liverpool have been shocking defensively, and West Ham, despite their defensive woes, they're still scoring plenty of goals, and I think the likes of Jarrod Bowen could be on the score sheet here, but Van Dijk is still a good choice when it comes to defcon, but he costs 6 million, you need some clean sheets, and right now it's difficult to see Liverpool keeping any at this moment in time. But that's not the case with Timber, who might struggle this weekend against Chelsea when it comes to FPL output, but in the long term he's going to be a great asset. I could see several teams rotating in midweek because remember, we have a Tuesday deadline for Gameweek 14 and such a quick turnaround, and a week later we've got more Champions League matches in match day 6. So the likes of Arsenal and Chelsea could rotate, and Chelsea will be facing Leeds away and Arsenal will be up against Brentford. So that's where Igor Thiago, for example, who people would consider benching, he might even be a good starter in such a game, and Arsenal might start Ben White over Timber in a fixture like that, so be very mindful, and the drop-off isn't too big where the Gunners could be at risk of dropping very crucial points. As for Lacroix facing Man United at home, the Eagles have a decent record against the Red Devils, but it can also be a fairly balanced fixture at times, and there can be a lot of draws in the process. But as long as Lacroix can get something, whether through DEFCON or a clean sheet, I'd be fairly happy with that. But in terms of attacking returns, we saw one against Wolves through the assist, but I think Lacroix is still due another massive haul with a goal scored from a set piece. He's always very, promising in these situations. He can hit the post and also get very close to scoring, but I think he underperforms his XG and he gets plenty of big chances for a centre-back. And the same goes for some of my midfielders, and Antoine Semenyo would stay if I decide to not wildcard or free hit and see if he can play against Sunderland away. Ndai is also up against Newcastle, and I've got Dan Burn in my 15-man squad as well. But of course, with 2 free transfers, I could optimize certain things and try to get to the likes of Saka, Declan Rice, although this week wouldn't be a great time to enter some Arsenal players or buy them. And the same goes for Chelsea as well. Ismail Assar and Bruno Fernandes will be facing each other. And of course, I've got a clash between Lacroix and Fernandes there, and you would rather avoid that if possible. And I still think this midfield is quite solid, but they have underperformed in recent weeks, and there are better alternatives right now. Even Brian Mbeumo, who blanked against Everton and delivered 1 point. You've also got Bruno Guimaraes and plenty of other options where that came from, but there aren't many standouts in Fantasy Premier League this season. Enzo Fernandez and Neto have been impressive. You've got Eze and Rice, who are in the podium of the highest scoring midfielders, but Semenyo is still top after an incredible start, but he tailed off, of course, since that Fulham game where he produced 18 points overall. As for the front line, the only transfer that would be locked in for me is Joao Pedro to Igor Thiago, and I don't need to rush into it because Thiago is cheaper, and the only kind of thing that could cost me is if I go days and days without activating the wildcard or free hit, and then I'm priced out of the ideal 50-man squad. But you can always cheap out certain players on your bench to ensure you've got the correct starting 11 on the free hit chip, for example. That would be a little bit different on the wildcard though, where you want to build up more team value if possible and have as much squad depth as you can for the Christmas period. But I think Thiago is the main captaincy contender for Erling Haaland this week, and both of them have plum fixtures at home against newly promoted sides, and Nick Voltemada is away to Everton. So as you can see, I've got 2 Newcastle players and 1 from Everton. They can score in the same match, of course, in dies on penalties. And if Anthony Gordon isn't on the pitch, Nick Voltemada will be on those duties for Newcastle United. Let's now take a look at my bench, which includes Robert Sanchez at home to Arsenal. Dan Burn away to Everton isn't terrible, but Rangers against Leeds at home, that's because I don't expect him to start in that match. And the last player is Reinildo from Sunderland, and he has been quite poor for me in FPL. I've not really gotten any returns from him, but he is a 4 million option, a facilitator and enabler for the entire 50-man squad. I think Mukiele is worth the extra 0.2 million. Even Ballard at 4.6 offers better value in general, but it's also about funding the other moves you want in the midfield and forward line, and that could be very important, and it justifies going for the cheaper option in Reinildo. But when it comes to the captaincy, Erling Haaland will take the armband. He has been underwhelming in the recent matches across the Champions League and Premier League, but I think a big return is coming. And if you've got the triple captaincy, using it now is just a great opportunity. Probably the best you'll get for the remainder of the first half of the season, which ends, of course, in Gameweek 20. But if you also got the free hit and wildcard, you've got a big decision to make, and you've got to prioritize those boosters in the correct sequence, and that depends on your team situation. But I think the free hit could also be used in Gameweek 16, for example, and with the wildcard, you could use it in Gameweek 14, provided that you're happy enough with your squad for this week, and that's where the triple captaincy could come into play. Igor Thiago is the closest contender. That's why he gets the vice. And you saw my top 10 captaincy list fairly recently, and Igor Thiago was in second place. And I think there's a big gap between him and the rest of the pack. But the same goes when you're comparing Haaland to Igor Thiago as a captaincy option. But the last thing to really talk about is the expected points when it comes to the analysis of this squad. And that's with only 1 transfer being made. Igor Thiago in for Joao Pedro, and ultimately Thiago will be in my setup come the Gameweek 13 deadline. Dubravka has 3.2 expected points, which is actually lower than Robert Sanchez at 3.4. Lacroix offers 4.4 predicted points, and Sarr in the same fixture has 4.8. With Duran Timber though, it's only 3.7, and Van Dijk is higher at 4.3. And Bruno Fernandes is always quite solid, and he offers 5.4 expected points, and Antoine Semenyo is quite low because of the yellow flag at 4.5, but we could see an increase if that flag is removed before the deadline. And Ndai offers 5.1 predicted points. Igor Thiago produces 5.6, and these are all taken by the website Fantasy Football Hub. Erling Haaland is by far the highest at 8.6, and Voltemada is always quite low, and he has 4.4 expected points. On my bench, Dan Burn is first, and he's got 3.9. Reinders at 1.5, and Reinildo offers 3.5, which is quite impressive for a Formula 1 defender, but unfortunately he gets a lot of 1 and 2 pointers because of the yellow cards, and he's not the greatest when it comes to DEFCON, but he's always going to be on my bench essentially. I don't see myself starting him anytime soon. It's just a shame that last week I had injuries and suspensions, of course, to Semenyo and Dan Burn, and that's why Reinildo came on in the first place to deliver 1 point overall. But let me go to the website FPL.team and show you the free hit and wildcard squads, compare the two of them with some updates following Liverpool's disastrous result against PSV Eindhoven, and they are on the brink of a managerial change because their performances and results simply haven't been good enough. So should we actually go for West Ham players like Jarrod Bowen and target Liverpool, or should we stick with the likes of Van Dijk and Salah in our wildcard and free hit squads? I'll begin with the free hit, which is the most likely scenario for me this week. I think, as things stand, that is the more likely deployed chip for the Gameweek 13 deadline, and the wildcard is still a possibility, but I see myself using that in Gameweek 14 or beyond. Emi Martinez would be the starting goalkeeper. In isolation, Donnarumma is slightly better when it comes to the clean sheet chances, and Man City are top with a 54% probability, but Aston Villa are second with a 45% chance, and they've got 8 wins out of the last 10 matches before their game on Thursday night in the Europa League. I've gone for Munoz, Vandenberg and O'Reilly, but with Brentford you can also go for Keller in goal. You've got the likes of Coyote and maybe Collins, but I think Vandenberg offers even better value and also more DEFCON potential, and Nico O'Reilly is one of the most informed defenders from an FPL perspective, and I've gone for Munoz over Virgil van Dijk compared to the free hit squad I showed you recently because Liverpool look shambolic defensively, and I would back West Ham to score a goal or two. But Mohamed Salah is still in here. He has a great record against the Hammers, and there have been a few signs in terms of improvement with his performances, especially against Nottingham Forest, but I think he's just far too much money to include on a wildcard, for example, and that's why, with Liverpool having promising fixtures from a few weeks ago, I still wasn't too keen on including him in a wildcard draft. It causes too many compromises in other areas. That could work on a free hit, especially given his high ceiling and the points potential, but we haven't really seen it too often this season. His best performance was against Atletico Madrid in matchday 1 of the Champions League, but we haven't seen that sort of level in the Premier League all year round, since February really. Rodgers, Schade and Doku would complete the midfield, and if you've got enough money, you might want to stretch to Phil Foden. I could see him doing really well against Leeds United. Schade is going to be a very good option as a differential at 7 million, but you can also consider Danga or Ouattara, and he is the most likely to drop out if Brentford switch to a back 5, but I don't see them doing that against Burnley, and I think both of them would be very decent options in the Gameweek 13 free hit. Not necessarily though for the long term. That isn't the case with Igor Thiago, who is fixture proof. He's on penalties, great underlying numbers, and he offers amazing value at 6.5 million. Erling Haaland speaks for himself. Despite a few blips here and there, he is still the best premium and option in Fantasy Premier League, and Danny Welbeck is quite close to Igor Thiago when it comes to FPL output, but when you look at the underlying numbers, Igor Thiago trumps him in most of those key stats. Danso is first on the bench. He will start in place of the suspended Christian Romero. Dubravka's the backup goalkeeper. You don't need to spend too much money on the second option there. And I've got King and Estev with 0.7 million left in the bank, so you can upgrade one of those players if you wish, or maybe one of the players in the starting 11, which is more important. But let me know what you would change down the comment section below, and also like the video, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and also hype it on the YouTube app. But let's compare it to the wildcard, where I've got 0.3 million in the bank, and I would go for Raya and Dubravka as the two goalkeepers, Munoz, Cash and O'Reilly, with Timber and Mukiele completing the defensive line. Minter, Rodgers, Rice and Mbuma would start, and Bruno Guimaraes could be on the bench, and a front three of Mateta, Haaland and Thiago also works very well, and I wouldn't mind going for Danny Welbeck on a wildcard, and Nick Voltemada is still decent. Those are my top 5 forwards in FPL right now, but these 3 are my favourites in the long term. The captaincy wouldn't change, and I still like this wildcard squad, by the way, but I prefer the free hit because it also allows me to then bring in more Arsenal players on the wildcard in Gameweek 14, and whilst you can also do that here, in Game Week 13 and bench one or two of them, I still think in terms of timing, if you've got both the free hit and wildcard, in many situations, I would prefer a Game Week 13 free hit and then wildcarding slightly afterwards, probably in Game Week 14, but that could also change depending on which teams you've piled up on, if you have any clashes, for example, and a lot of you might have plenty of Crystal Palace and United players, Chelsea and Arsenal, and if that's the case, a free hit right now to then bring in a triple City, also Aston Villa and Brentford, could work very well in the grand scheme of things. There wasn't a massive difference between the expected points according to FPL.team with the wildcard and free hit squads, but the free hit does lead a little bit, and I think that could be the best course of action. So 53.7 compared to the 51.8 of the wildcard, and ultimately with the latter chip, it is a long-term tool because it enforces permanent changes to your squad. The free hit, on the other hand, is going to be for one game week only, and then your team reverts back to how it was. You can't make transfers free hit and then have those transfers go through and kind of take advantage of that. And people ask the same in UCL Fantasy with the Limitless chip. And of course, with the wildcard, it doesn't matter because they are permanent changes anyway. And that is by far the most powerful booster in Fantasy Premier League. The free hit can also be very useful in a week like this. And usually we use that chip in a blank or double game week, but those will take place after game week 30. And in the first half of the season, of course, we have to think a little bit outside the box, and it's very team dependent. So for some people, Game Week 13 makes a lot of sense. For others, Game Week 16, and there might even be another Game Week not mentioned, like Game Week 14 or 15, where in some cases the free hit would be best used. But let's not also, forget the bench boost and the triple captain. You want to use all of them before we get to Game Week 20. And I want to see your thoughts on West Ham versus Liverpool. Who do you back in that game? I mean, it's so crazy how the season has turned out. West Ham were diabolical at the beginning, and Liverpool were top with 5 wins out of 5, and people thought they would run away with the Premier League title. But I still think Salah has something to offer on the free hit, but he just doesn't justify that 14.2 million price tag. If you do have him, I'd keep until he goes off to AFCON, and then probably not consider him until Liverpool and Salah show some serious form in the months to come. But yeah, we'll see how he does with Egypt at the African Cup of Nations. You can see also the heat map and how West Ham can see their chances generally with the blue circles on screen, and the heat map is Mohamed Salah. So West Ham have a clear weakness on the right hand side, and I think Salah could exploit that and still walk away with a goal and assist, even if West Ham go on to win the game, which they have a great chance of doing if Liverpool continue playing the way they are. But with Salah, I still think he's right up there for the captaincy contenders, but there is no chance I'd go with him in terms of the armband over Erling Haaland, and even Igor Thiago would be a better option at this moment in time. Thank you very much for watching this video and this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit that notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video to over 150 likes and closing on new goals like 38k on YouTube. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the Championships, fair access to my videos, proud to comments amongst many other perks, my Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next FPL deadline stream, and don't be caught out by the quick turnaround with yet another deadline on Tuesday.